All right, thank you everybody for being here. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We're here for the Assembly Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee of the Whole special meeting. We're here on December 6th, and we're scheduled to go from 12:40 p.m. to 2:10 p.m. First off, I'd like to go around the room and start with member introductions from the Assembly.
Kevin Cross.
Karen Bronga.
Daniel Volant.
And Zach Johnson, and I don't believe we have anyone on the phone yet, but if they show up, we'll add them. And then from the administration.
Mario Bird, Chief of Staff.
Good afternoon, Kent Colhays.
Gentleman from DOT.
Afternoon, all. My name is Burrell Nickerson, Central Region DOT Maintenance and Operations Manager.
I'm Sean Holland with the DOT, the Central Region Director.
Kirk Warren, Chief Maintenance and Operations for Central Region DOT.
Thank you all for being here. So the only other item we have on our new business today is a debrief and discussion regarding the response to recent snow events. So I think we're going to just jump right into that. We have a presentation for the administration. I think after they go, we'll give the folks from DOT a chance to kind of dovetail on that, and then afterwards we'll get into member questions. So gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I just want to lay out that this is a continuing process. What I intend to give is the mayor's office and a high-level overview of how the snow emergency played out both before, during, and after. And then we do have Mr. Colhays, obviously, but also Paul Van Landingham, Lance Wilbur, and some of our, and Shay Throop from our other departments that are available for questions if we need to get into detail. So I just wanted to let all the members know that the administration is here. It's more than just Mr. Colhays and myself. So thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I'll begin. So our executive summary after the snow emergency that took place from November 5th until the final termination of the emergency on November 17th can be summarized in four main points. Number one, municipal employees responded to this record-setting snowfall according to plan and precedent. Number two, a record-breaking snowfall event should not, in our view, determine the staffing and operation levels of street maintenance. But number three, managing expectations during a record-setting snowfall can definitely be improved. Number four, the coordination between the municipality and the state and communicating that coordination to the public can also definitely be improved. So to set the stage, our snow and ice removal plan, some of you saw this when the mayor released it back in mid-October. In general, when there are 2 or more inches of snow and it continues to fall, the municipality deploys 30 graders and 4 to 6 sand trucks on main streets. You've also heard those as arterials and collectors. It generally takes our crews 10 hours to complete these mains, and we continue plowing the mains if the snow itself continues, but we move the teams into the residential areas if the mains are cleared, and that's when the residential plow out begins. That's the 84-hour goal that we have for this type of snowfall. When we have extreme snow events like we had in mid-November, it's challenging both because of the volume and in this particular snowfall because of the heavy and wet snow. I'll go into more of that later. We have a 2-pronged snow plan. I've got a very low-res version here, but you can go on the Muni website and see it, Plan A and Plan B. This is flip-flops depending on when the who's up next, so that some neighborhoods get cleared first in Plan A, and some neighborhoods get cleared first in Plan B. There are factors that affect how quickly the residential plow out happens, whether it's a trash collection day, whether you're in the central business district downtown, which has its own special plowing plan, industrial areas that can't be plowed during the day, and of course, varying snow depths depending on where you are in town, and also parked cars, which we'll deal with also later in the presentation. So that's the general snow plan and snow removal plan that we went into the season with. After the plow out happens, as has been going on, widening these main streets or arterials and collectors by hauling, winging, or blowing back. I have no idea what those things mean, but that's why we have technicians here. They also, after the main streets, go into the residential areas and then cleaning cul-de-sacs by stacking or hauling. So that's kind of the post-game or the after action from the operations point of view. This is just a brief bar graph showing the accumulation of snow beginning on 5 November and then concluding at the end of the emergency on 17 November. As you can see, we had a pretty big snowfall to kick it off, but then we had 1, 2, 3, what would have been record snowfalls. The first coming on 8 November, the second the next day, 8.2 inches, and then the third, again, 13 November. Again, those were all comparable days, the sequence of which was very important as to why we had the accumulation that we did, both in residential areas and then also in the municipal main roads and the state of Alaska maintained roads. So with that, I'll give a timeline that goes a little bit more in depth as to the accumulation, when it happened, and what the municipality's actions were. So as you know, we had a snow emergency about a year ago, and at that time, when that happened, the mayor instructed us we need to have a better plan of action. So when that first coalesced into actionable items was in late August. We had a roundtable. We convened a meeting to hear suggestions from the department heads, and we were planning to update the snow and ice removal plan as it existed at that point. About 40 days later, we had a draft version. Again, there were meetings convened by both Mr. Kohlhase and the mayor, reviewing the draft, testing it with relevant departments. And then in mid-October, we published that plan. Some of you, I think, remember that. And that was the plan that we went into the season with. As we discussed before, November 5th, we had a little over 6 inches of accumulation. That is when municipal street maintenance began the residential plow out after finishing the main roads. There was more snow forecast at the time. Many of you, I'm sure, remember. On November 8th, which was a Wednesday, we had our record snowfall of 9 inches. Street crews were deployed to neighborhoods by single graders rather than double grader teams. That was unusual because usually the municipality deploys double grader teams. Because we had more snow in the forecast, we decided it was a good idea to have residential areas plowed out at least once before going back to the mains. And that's part of the snow plan. You have to go back to the mains if more snow continues to accumulate. So the next day, November 9th, that was a Thursday, crews continued to plow. Heavy wet snow continued. Again, it probably would have been a record had it not snowed even more the day before. That is when the school district closed. And then that evening, the mayor declared the snow emergency at 6:30 p.m. I believe also municipal offices were closed except for critical staff. The next day, Friday, November 10th, was Veterans Day observed. Snow continued. It continued also to be heavy and wet. At 3.6 inches, it was less than the previous 2 days, but still what otherwise would have been a heavier than usual snow. More snow was forecast for 13 November. We were in communication with Assembly leadership, as some of you know, and the mayor issued that second emergency order with some help from Assembly leadership, putting a fine point on the termination date of the emergency, which was 17 November. Because we had, I want to emphasize, because we had forecasts Monday being another heavy snow day, that was why that second emergency order was issued. That weekend, the Saturday and the Sunday, temperatures dropped. We went from being in the, I think, mid to high 20s to around 0 degrees. So the heavy wet snow then froze up. The municipality and the state were working closely at that time, and the decision was made to ask the state of Alaska if we had permission to help assist on some of their roads. This delayed the neighborhood plowouts, but this was a safety issue that the mayor decided we need to make sure that the main roads, the arterials and collectors for municipality, but also the main roads for the state are sufficient for emergency vehicles to access. On November 13th, that was a Monday, another 8.7 inches of snow accumulated. Municipal crews continued with plow plan A. As you know, school district maintained closure district-wide. After November 13th, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there was little to no snow. Residential plow out timeline slowed due to the heavy and wet snow conditions. This include the local service areas. The initial snowpack solidified from the 11-12 November timeframe, and it became much more difficult to plow out those residential areas when municipal crews finally got there. Excuse me. The streets and the mayor's office fielded hundreds of calls. I have to say, for streets, it was probably what we've heard was over 1,000 calls. So mayor's office, our phone lines melted, but it didn't really compare. November 17th was the technical end of the emergency. School district on that Friday reopened district-wide. And then November 19th was the completion of the second neighborhood plow that had begun on November 13th, which was the last major day of snow for that relatively 16-day time frame. So after the emergency, we discussed with state officials, some of whom are here, details regarding the agreement to help plow some of the state roads. This included continuing issues such as bus stops. I know I've discussed with some of you how do we deal with municipal bus stops along state roads. That was a topic of discussion at that point. Last week, November 29th, the mayor and the municipal manager convened an internal after-action meeting. We went over the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then today, obviously, we're here for the work session. So our key takeaways and our assessment after that internal meeting last week were as follows. From the municipal manager, and Kent, if I'm putting words in your mouth that don't belong there, feel free to just whack me. We saw great work by all the snow removal employees. Street maintenance crews worked back-to-back shifts basically from November 5th to November 17th, and probably more like the 19th because that's when the plow out finished. They have a great sense of pride and duty in keeping the city running. The mayor went to visit them. There was good morale. The crew knew that they were needed, and we were very proud of the work they did. Fleet Services did an excellent job keeping the equipment up and running. Mission critical equipment stayed operational throughout the event, and there was also good management at the emergency level effort by the leadership there. It's a lot of moving parts, especially when you're dealing with not only different departments, but also in conjunction with the state roads here in Anchorage. Some of you read Mr. Hughes' article in the Daily News over the weekend. It gives a good historical overview. If you haven't read it, I recommend it just to see how we've gotten to the conglomeration of municipal and state roads here in the Anchorage Bowl especially. Street maintenance, again, we thought it was a great performance by the crews and the leadership there. We had great updates from the superintendent, Eric Hodgson. The heavy and wet snow is what, in our view, caused 3 to 4 times longer to finish the usual neighborhood plowouts. The example that we heard was a cul-de-sac with a true 2-grader team usually takes 3 to 4 minutes. In this case, it was taken 12 minutes. And that's something Mr. Wilbur observed. You can get more details from him. Over 10,000 loads of snow were hauled in November, and 6,000 are hauled in an average winter. So that gives you an idea of the amount of accumulation that happened in a very short window of time from the 5th to the 17th. The downtown business district was an issue that we continue to look at. The public definitely appreciated the Easy Park garages being open to encourage people to park off the streets, but we recognize we need better coordination for downtown, especially between the municipality, downtown partnership, and ACDA for snow removal in the downtown district. State of Alaska roads, we had a great partnership with the state when we realized that getting to those roads was a necessity, not a luxury. We had good communication with them throughout, but we recognize we can improve the communication out to the public on this issue and have a better idea on future events how to manage that. One thing that we're going to continue to highlight is that citizens are still plowing into streets and into rights of way. We need continued enforcement. It was brought up in our internal meeting that Matt Sue is dealing with this issue as well. We did have good operational level coordination with the school district, and we're grateful for that. From our transit department, we had People Mover, Anchor Rides, and then obviously the sites at which they're operating and picking up people and dropping off. We had critical staff at People Mover workstations. They worked well with the union employees and got an emergency schedule change. Excuse me. And they used new technology called M-Stop to complement the messages that People Mover was otherwise sending to the public. One thing that we recognized was that the snow contractor that was working for transit also works for AFD and APD, so there was some competition about who gets priority, so that's something that we're looking into to improve. Some contractors that work for People Mover were unequipped when it came to chains and being able to move their vehicles and moving a lot of snow. We had problems with bus stops and sidewalks that we're going to look into how we can improve, and also how to improve our work with the state on that issue as well. Anchor rides, there are 11 new all-wheel drive vehicles, and they performed well even in the heaviest of the snow conditions. However, there were some neighborhoods that could not be accessed by anchor rides for essential trips. That's a priority for us for an upcoming snow event. There's also the backlog of non-essential trips to be cleared. That was something that was flagged by Ms. Acton, Director of Transit. For purchasing, the emergency contracts, we were responsive and executed contracts quickly. It's not easy to call emergency contracts on a short notice. Purchasing, working together with the street head, Paul Van Landingham, did a great job getting contractors in and completing them. But with that being said, we recognize we can improve our preparedness with these contracts and having them lined up. Coordinating with the state, the school district, the airport, and also the military, the local government entities that we generally have interfacing with, there's potential there to piggyback on shared issues like this. But the other side of that coin is there's competition among contractors who are looking for that work from the local government entities. So that's something we are looking at as well. From the mayor's office, my assessment was we had consistent communication both within the administration and also to assembly leadership and other assembly members. And I appreciate those of you who reached out to us and flagged stuff for us we wouldn't have otherwise seen. So that was great. Thank you. We had a prepared snow plan in hand. One of the things that we're going to work on improving is the snow plan not having outlined steps for declaring the snow emergency or outlined specific departmental roles within the emergency. Communications, we had great coordination between communications and street maintenance to keep the public informed. They had daily snowplow and removal updates for Eagle River, Anchorage Bowl, Girdwood. It was shared on our website. And these efforts were recognized by the public, I think, particularly on social media. Some of the data that we wanted to highlight, the snow emergency website averaged over 21,000 views a day throughout the emergency. We had, as I mentioned, over 200 calls to the mayor's office, but 1,700 to street maintenance. They win that battle. The viewers were able to access street maintenance maps, track residential plow out status, and we had over 8 million potential social media engagements regarding the snow event. So it was high on everybody's radar. After our internal meeting and reviewing the data that we just presented, these are the recommendations we have. Number one, we want to create a snow and ice emergency communications plan and have a dedicated PIO at street maintenance who can lead website reorganization and update the website during events, media coordination during the snow emergency so that folks know where are we at, where are we going, how do we get there. We also want to have a document that explains plow plan A and plow plan B. Like I said, I've got this document. It's great, but it's GIS, and I struggle with GIS. Maybe nobody else does, but it would be good to have something just a little bit more user-friendly, and that's something that we're looking to do. Number two, we do want to manage expectations, and here's what I mean by that. We want to educate citizens. What should you expect during a plow out, and should that plow out be scaled on a timeline based on the snow accumulation, both the amount that we're getting and whether it's heavy and wet snow like we had in mid-November. The biggest takeaway here is, as we are currently staffed, the municipality cannot move 40 inches of wet, heavy snow in 84 hours. And that's our model, right? 84-hour residential plow out once the arterials and collectors are completed. So what we've considered is, if we're going to have more than 8 inches, maybe it's a 96-hour plow out. And again, that depends not just on the accumulation, but also the type of snow we're getting, whether there's a freeze in between. If it's more than 16 inches, 120 hours. We've also considered adding a level 4 response in the current snow plan or revising the current level 3 response to considering plowing without gates or other extreme measures. Gates are those things on the end of the plows that prevent a berm from accumulating at the end of your driveway. Again, in a snow emergency like this, is it more important to get things plowed and everybody has to deal with the berm, but at least the streets get going faster? That's one of the things we've considered. Excuse me. Recommendation 3, transit improvements. The all-wheel drive vehicles work great. As the vehicles retire, I think we're going to recommend replacing all the new Anchor Rides vehicles as all-wheel drive vehicles. We do want to identify and map clients on life-sustaining trips and request additional snow clearing assistance if we have folks in that situation. We do want to contract with non-emergency transportation providers or cab companies, help augment service to get caught up when we have a backlog. And then we also want to address sidewalk accessibility issues during the snow events so that people with limited mobility can access the bus stops. The fourth recommendation we have is from the mayor's office. We want to work more closely with the Office of Emergency Management to create a snow emergency response binder or plan. So that's something we've been working with Ms. Loach over in emergency management. We'd like to plan, train, and conduct an exercise, and then evaluate the capital expenditures for more graders and reconditioned graders. It's a longer discussion, I think, and one that I'm sure the Assembly will be tuned into. So with that, Mr. Chair, I again come back to my 4 initial points. Municipal employees responded very well to record-setting snowfall. It's our opinion, the record-setting snowfall, we definitely have to take a look at what it did to us. But at this point, we're not comfortable saying that should determine our staffing and operation level of street maintenance. Managing expectations can be improved, and so can coordination between the municipality and the state and communicating that coordination. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude, and I thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Byrd. I'll just say for the record, we were joined between 12:43 and 12:46 by members Felix Rivera, Randy Salt, and Anna Brawley. And for the folks who just came in, we heard the presentation from the Chief of Staff. We also have representatives here from State DOT, and I've asked them to go ahead and kind of share their thoughts before we jump into the member questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Sean Holland, DOT Regional Director for the Central Region. And yeah, that's a tough act to follow up. Mario, I should have called you before the meeting and said, what kind of presentation are you putting together? But so we concur with everything he said. And we do. But I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. But I guess starting off, I just kind of wanted to say that I was encouraged by that higher level partnering in response to that November snowfall. You know, the mayor calling the commissioner and kind of working out that deal to react to what the city of Anchorage's priorities were. You know, at an operations level, our folks, the city and the DOT, have a great relationship, and they approach the snow removal in the city as a team. And you know, our roads are so intermixed. I don't know if you guys saw that story in the ADN here the last few days, but our roads are so intermixed that we need to continue that relationship and probably improve on it to be successful. We do have a formal agreement in place between the city and the DOT that breaks up duties of different roads based on a couple things. Generally, it's location and equipment type. So location would be like Diamond is a good example, that if the DOT is plowing Diamond, it doesn't make much sense to serve the people of Anchorage for us to pick up our blade and turn around and go the other way when we hit the point where that ownership changes from state to the city. And as far as the equipment, we have different types of equipment. You know, the DOT is set up to with high-speed plows for plowing highways mostly. We do have a bunch of residential streets. The city is more set up to plow residential streets. And I think a good example of one of the trades in that TORA, which is a transfer of responsibility agreement, is Johns Road probably, you know, which is a state-owned road, but it's full of driveways, you know, so it makes more sense for the equipment the city has to go plow that. And generally, I mean, there's a few different pieces, but one of the pieces might be like our graders don't have the gates that go down and kind of trap the snow as they go past those driveways and approaches in the cities too. So it kind of makes more sense for them to take over, for them to trade those types of roads. You know, we're a solution-based organization, the DOT, and I'm hopeful that, you know, meetings like this can further facilitate that partnership so that we can serve the city of Anchorage better as a team. And we can always do better. There's no question. But kind of second what Mario said is that I think the saying that I heard recently it was in the paper too, that you don't want to build a church for Easter Sunday, right? So you don't want to staff to a record-breaking snowfall. As a taxpayer of the city of Anchorage, I don't think we should staff to a record snowfall. I think lots of people would agree with that. But so we've had 2 record snowfalls in the last year. And so the question is that going to be the norm? You know, it's hard to say, impossible to say, but time will tell. And, the solution's not as simple as just adding equipment. That snow removal is high maintenance equipment, so if we ramp up our equipment, which we may do, we're also going to have to ramp up that support staff. You need operators, you need mechanics, and we're not able to just flick a switch and create those resources. Both those things are skilled trades, and industry wide, I think we've fallen behind in kind of developing that workforce, and that's something that we need to focus on. We also have to choose the right equipment. Snow blowers are great, but you'll only work them for half the year or less. So we may opt to go with a truck that we can use in the summer for summer operations, and then put a plow on it in the winter, or a sander, or what have you. But that takes two things. It takes converting that truck in the fall to a snow removal piece of equipment, means you can't use it for the summer activities. On the other side, you have to take that apart so that you can use it for summer activities in the spring. And the timing on that is also a hard question. If we could know the weather, that would make it a lot easier. So in addition to our own resources, we have the ability to bring contractors on board. We have several contracts for on-call for plowing, for sidewalk snow blowing, and truck hauling. Also, we're still cleaning up from that last snowstorm, so we had some emergency contracts with several contractors that we don't have on a regular basis. Again, I think Mario brought it up, is that two things. The operators is a skilled trade, so the guys that drive those graders or run those graders on a construction equipment may not have the same skills that are needed to remove snow. It's not two totally different things, but two different things. It's a different skill set. And so, and then some of that equipment that the contractors have, that usually, the QAPs and the granites that we contracted with, they don't usually gear their equipment for winter snow removal. So there's some time in there as well. And but we did use them, and it definitely helped us out a lot. And one of the big skills that's important to note is that, if you're grading a road on a construction project, you generally have traffic control in place, and you're separating the traveling public from the work. When these guys are out plowing, they don't. They're working in the traffic. And so that's another skill that those snow removal guys have to have, is to be able to work in traffic when people are trying to pull by them on a snowy road and things like that. And I think I mentioned that we are still cleaning up from that snowstorm. It's going to be about a $2 million exercise, probably in that ballpark. We may not hit that number, but we'll be close. As far as resources that we have in Anchorage, we have 38 full-time operator positions, and 5 of those folks have other duties as foremen. I think we have a vacancy in there too, or 1 or 3 maybe. But we have a net 32 operators. Those guys work on overlapping 12-hour shifts when we have an event like this. The equipment that we have 11 high-speed plow trucks, and we have 4 graders. And again, the high-speed plow trucks are kind of our bread and butter. That's what we use to clear the highways. The graders are much slower operation. We also have 4 sidewalk snow blowers, and then we have various larger snow blowers that we use kind of after the fact to load up trucks. We have our own trucks, but generally rely heavily on contractors for making that snow haul. And I think that's about all I had. But again, happy to answer any questions. And I guess I will mention that the day of that record snowfall was my second official day on the job. So I brought a couple guys who can answer any hard questions that you have. But I'm not sure if that was someone trying to tell me something or what. But no, it was pretty interesting actually to listen in and just see the behind the scenes, the orchestration that goes on. And again, the partnership with the folks at the city. I never had any idea. Worked at the DOT for 18 years, and but always on the capital side. My first exposure to the maintenance side. But yeah, I was pretty impressed by that teamwork. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you stuck it out. So we have a pretty good queue. We have member Salt, Brawley, Bronga, Volland, and then myself in the queue. So Randy, if you'd like to go ahead.
All right. So I think overall, I agree. I think you guys did a good job given the snow, but put yourself in the citizens or the parent who wants to get the kid to school. It's not plowed. There's a berm in my driveway, right? So even though we did a good job, you're still going to get those complaints. Just some of the highlights. I'm going to call out Mia. Great job. I know she was, I don't know if the rest of y'all, but she was my Spock and very responsive. As I believe, may not be the answer I want, but I got an answer. So that was great. Great job on delineating state and muni roads. Great job on the status of plow. Great job on the status of sidewalks. Emergency declaration, emergency contracts, the senior helpline, the snow line to call, as long as it worked and someone got through. So I would suggest do more of that. Keep that phone number, keep that email. People want to be heard. They want to know that they've been heard. Sometimes it's just about complaining. And also, how can we turn that around and what can the citizens do to help us? So we all got lots of emails. I mean, I got some. I need the road plowed so I can get to Pilates. Not a great reason to get out on the roads. And I don't think they realize that when they get stuck, that it may pull resources off of a job to come get them unstuck. And also could lead to damaged equipment if cars aren't parked properly and so forth. Couple other things, the state versus muni, ASD versus, we've got to get that sorted out. My personal opinion, there's too many state roads in Anchorage, and we're wasting too much time with non-productive time where plows have their blades up, moving from one location to another, or the parks will plow a sidewalk, turn left when there's a sidewalk right there to the right that the state has to take care of. Now you got to migrate equipment there. So continue to work that out, get there. One is I'd like to know what equipment do we have today versus 20 years ago? I heard the mayor make the comment, I'm not going to put a bond for more equipment unless you can tell me the snow loading. I'm pretty sure that even the most conservative person in the city would put a little money towards more yellow iron to get out there on the roads. Nothing should be idle. Nothing should be driven over the blade up. Avoid if you can the block driveways, the high berms, the disappearing lane. There's still one on International. I know Abbott Diamond always seems to get one. That's a safety issue. And also it just creates more complaints. It just makes it harder. It's kind of like I'm at work. It's late. The wife calls and wants to argue with me as far as why am I not home and what am I doing? I'm like, well, by answering this phone call, I'm going to take a little bit longer. So if we can try to prevent the reasons for people to complain, and again, like I said, empower citizens. What can they do? What are their expectations? They're expecting 84-hour plow. I haven't seen a plow in 10 days. Well, you might not see a plow in 10 days, and here's why. So if they know that going into it, I think it's a little bit better. Also, I got a lot of requests about shared help. There were slopers that this is what they do. They work roads and pads on slope. They run plows, they run graders, and they're like, I'm home. I will absolutely help out. I'm sure you have people from JSJ Bear, maybe ASD bus drivers that aren't driving buses because there's too much snow. Is there a way to have that ready reserve of people who have been checked out, qualified, and if need be, if we had the equipment, they could hop in a truck and help out? And the last thing, I know Mario and Kent are well aware of it, is the issue with O'Malley Elementary and Rock Ridge Drive, which we still need to sort out. Yeah, I know. Sorry. One other thing, did I ask for you can email me, what's the standard for plowing? So the standard for plowing, and that goes back to Rock Ridge. How much snow should be left? How much ice should be left? When do you gravel? Things like that. And that's more of a safety aspect. How do I know a road's been taken care of properly when it's done? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Salt. Next in the queue, Member Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few questions, but I'm just going to do one for now, and then I'll get back in the queue. And this is for both the state folks and city folks. I guess I'm surprised to hear you say that you're not recommending increased staffing. And the reason is because I understand that we had an unusual snow event, and that we can't, as you said, we can't fully staff up and have perfect level of service for something that is, outside the norm. However, it does feel like this is more and more the norm because we were in this situation about a year ago, maybe not the same circumstances exactly, but essentially lots of folks frustrated and it felt like a very slow response. I'm also new to the position, so I appreciate you flagging that. I know a lot of us are in that position. But also historically, it seems like we used to have more staff than we do now. And so I would love to see kind of a longer term, how many operators we had. I know that was brought up in the meeting as well for both city and state, because I think the reality is, and others have said this, we're adding more road miles, state and city over the years. And so it's reasonable to assume that we can't keep necessarily the same level of staff, and we certainly should not be reducing staff because both of those things are essentially a reduction in level of service. And so, because this is a public service, I appreciate the thoughts about private contractors. So I appreciate the thoughts about where the public fits in and where we can utilize, private sector. But fundamentally, if this is a service that people expect, then we need to staff it up. So my question for you guys is, what would you consider a normal level of staffing? And if it's this, then how do we increase our plow times, or sorry, our plow response? Because I'm going to echo what Mr. Soltz said. I think other people, not just us, are saying we should be having more staff. We should be putting more resources toward this so that we get that level of service.
Through the chair to Member Brawley, I'll take an initial stab at that. I think as both Mario and Mr. Holland said, I think it needs to be a reasoned approach as to deciding whether to staff up significantly based on what is now 2 years. Is this the new norm? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think that some of the numbers I've heard, so for example, this last snowfall, the last plow out event was declared Monday morning and finished Sunday evening. So that's 168 hours, I think. Our standard is 84 hours. To do that effort in 84 hours, according to my discussions with street maintenance management, would require 30 more graders and 60 more operators, in-house staff for the municipality, to essentially double the amount of equipment on the street. That's 24 hours a day, running another 30 graders. So that number is, that's $9 million in capital costs. It's $9 million or so a year in salary, I believe. So, I don't have the answer. Do we pull the trigger right now and buy 30 more graders and hire 60 more people to address that need? I don't know that that's the right approach right now. I think we certainly acknowledge, all of us acknowledge, I think if you talk to the street maintenance folks, they were very challenged by this event, and we would all, we're all public servants, DOT and us. Our overriding goal, I think, is to provide the best public service possible to the citizens. So I think that's why we're here having this discussion. I was telling Mario earlier, I wish I had saved it. There was a gentleman on X who asked a question of the citizens, and he got a number of responses that were not, they were not derogatory, they were not snarky, they were really good ideas on some things that we could do differently, that the city could do differently with respect to snow plowing and snow response. I didn't save that. I'm going to look for it, but I think forums like this and the well-intended comments of the citizens can help us arrive at a solution. But I don't know right now if the right answer is $10 million a year in salary and $10 million upfront outlay in capital costs.
And I would kind of second everything that Kent said. And again, we have 3 vacancies in our operators. We have some vacancies in our seasonal non-permanent positions that we would typically put into those sidewalk snow blowers. So we have vacancies. We have recruiting issues, which is probably a whole nother conversation. So I think we're not saying that we couldn't use a few more resources there. For sure. Again, it's level of standard. we got to kind of decide what we want to have for a level of standard. And then I'm going to rely on my operational guys to tell me what they need for resources. And then it's my job to find the funding or whatever we need to meet those requirements. But yeah, that's probably my answer to that, I guess. And that workforce development that we talked about before is that certainly we'll need to train those people and bring them up. One of the things that we are missing is that we have 7 out of 10. We have 70% vacancy, I think, in that ballpark in Anchorage in our mechanic field. And as I mentioned before, that those guys can double as operators, and they do. We have a bunch of different guys that even our electricians will jump in the seat, if needed. But having 70% vacancy in our mechanics, especially with snow removal equipment, which is high maintenance, that's another place that we have to look at, because it's not just the plows, it's not just the drivers, it's keeping those things on the road. And I think, according to, again, my operational folks there, that we've lost the ability that we had 10 years ago. We might have had the same number of trucks, but as things break, it takes us longer to get them back on the road. So that's going to be another focus of us, or for us, is to try to recruit those people. And again, that's another conversation, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate your answers. I'll say we, the Assembly, passed our legislative program last night for the municipality, including in it is something that I'm planning to advocate for in Juneau, which is increased resources to DOT specifically for road maintenance in Anchorage. So whether that's staff resources or equipment or both, that's for legislators to figure out and for you all. I will also just briefly note, in terms of changing conditions, I think it's important to also consider the ice. I know that came up, both freeze thaw, freezing rain, ice storms, if we have those. I'm from a place where ice is more common than snow. And if that is the new normal, then I think we should consider, for example, how much snow we leave on the roads. It's one thing if you assume it's frozen for all winter. It's another thing if all that snow turns into ice. And so I think we shouldn't just think about snowfall as changing conditions, but really broadly, what does the weather look like? And then how does that impact folks' ability to walk and drive? Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Member Braga.
You might have to cut me off. So I wanted to start out echoing Ms. Costello. Her messages were frequent and on point, and it really helped, because what we found super frustrating is that the public-facing map had inaccuracies, and that caused panic in my area. If they saw that map and it said Sector 32 was done and they hadn't seen a plow yet, they went crazy. And so she helped to bridge that gap where there was problems with that front-facing map. Paul was incredible and saved Out North's theater's performance. And I really appreciate him being receptive to that. And then the hotline, one day I was on the phone several times on hold, finally got a hold of someone, and they could barely talk. They'd talked to so many people. And the fact that they could keep answering that phone and be positive, I was very appreciative of that. And I think all of us felt the first time we saw a plow, this weird, yellow, oh my God, excitement. And I'm so thankful for those plows. But as I said, that public-facing map was bad. The disappearing lanes 5 days ago in front of UAA Drive still had a disappearing lane during the police academy sign-in. That's way too long to have that 1.5 lanes on a 2-lane road. On the 18th, Tudor Road still did not have the pedestrian paths done, and I know that's state. Unacceptable. That is a very busy road, and there were pedestrians walking down the road, one lady with a walker, a woman with a kid in a stroller. And we finally had a constituent, George and I, that went out with a shovel and hand shoveled from Regal Mountain or Reflection Lake area up to the bus stop. And so I'm appreciative that it's done now, but it can't take that long. I also, the who knows what, someone else mentioned, who owns what. 36th Avenue up off of Muldoon Road between Muldoon and Patterson is one of those no man's land. If we ask the city to come help, they say it's the state. If we ask the state to come do something, they say it's the cities. When we look at the plow map, it says it's city, but I know that the city does not claim it. So we have to get better at who owns what. The other thing that you talked about, shortage of operators. Right now, the ASD is in conversations with career academies. I would be getting in there with a track for heavy equipment operators. You get those young high school men and women thinking about that as a career. You show them what opportunity there is. How cool would that be? I know you had a constituent that missed Pilates. I had someone call in panic. She had to run to her colonoscopy after colonoscopy prep. Someone missed a knee replacement. There was the missed school, missed work. But the other thing that came up is some suggestions, and I'll just blat through them. Someone has to be plowed last, but Sillery Circle, the Knightsway College Gate area, were very last. The Saturday, the 18th, they finally were sending me messages that they were plowed out, and they were asking your A to B always leaves this sector last, and if there was a way to maybe mix that up a little bit. Another person asked if there was a possibility of localized weather looking before you plow, because sometimes up at Tudor and Muldoon, we'll be getting 2 feet while they're getting 4 inches by the airport. We do have different weather patterns. Another thing that this came up when we did the summer prep meeting. There was a person that wanted to form a citizens coalition. He was a retired school bus driver, knows a lot about heavy equipment, and he called me all summer saying, they need to get ready, they have to get ready. and then I didn't hear from him in the snow thing, so I hope he's okay. But a citizens coalition isn't a bad idea. Our constituents have a lot of experience with their neighborhoods and what's happening. And the last thing, no, one more thing. So the gates, I know that we have gates because that was confirmed this summer that don't let the berm happen. But there was berms pretty universally. Is that because there was so much snow it went over the gates? Or did you just have to abandon the gates?
If I may, Mr. Chair. To Member Brawley, both last year and this year, I recommended or suggested the idea to street maintenance of not using gates, and was roundly overridden both times. So what happens, and I did this in a past life, work for street maintenance. If there's enough snow, the gates just won't hold it. It either spills over the top of the blade or around the gate when they're trying to carry it past a driveway. So that's generally what happens. The operators would love to back up and clear every driveway, but when they do that, that's another 5 or 10 seconds per driveway, and you multiply that by 100 driveways in a subdivision, it starts adding up. So that's what happens is the blades with 16, 18, 20 inches of snow, wet, heavy snow, they just can't carry it. It spills over the end of the gate.
Thank you. And then the very last thing, now this, don't totally discount it, but someone sent me an article from New York about how garbage trucks are equipped with graders for emergency. And when there's a lot of snow, you're not going to get a garbage pickup. If we had the ability to throw a blade on some garbage trucks, they're trying it out there, so who knows? In any rate, they are CDL operators, right? I don't know if that's the right term. And if we had more plows, they could be helping to plow, I would think.
Thank you. Next in the queue, Member Volland.
Is this the broken one? We'll see.
Don't touch one. Thank you all for being here. And thank you for the presentation, Mr. Bird. So I do have a question. I think kind of along the same lines of what Member Brawley was getting at. So I think there's going to be a point when, calling heavy snowfall unprecedented or record breaking, like I do think there's going to be a point when the public's just not going to buy that anymore. And I think we're hearing from our constituents that they expect not a perfect level of service, but a better level of service. And so I'm interested in when you in your presentation talked about managing expectations on one slide, but then on another slide it says, as currently staffed, we can't fulfill XYZ. Is there a delta there? Is there a meet in the middle? Does the administration want to bring on more operators? Is the administration willing to reopen the contract with the operators in an effort to have more competitive pay and benefits? Because I think if we rewind in time and go back to the prior heavy snowfall, not the one that we just recently experienced, there was a meeting between the union representing the operators and the administration, where the administration was warned about a potential for a winter failure if they did not achieve higher staffing levels. So I guess, yeah, those would be a couple of my questions for the municipal administration. Are you going to address pay and benefits? Number one. Number two, are you open to increasing staffing or making targeted equipment investments? I'll start there.
Through the chair to Member Volan, with regard to pay, of course, the Assembly passed the pay incentive provision for equipment operators. We're meeting on that actually, if not tomorrow, on Friday internally to talk with HR about how to approach the union on that. So that's in the works. I think we'll certainly keep you posted on how those discussions go.
Great.
With regard to the staffing, the challenge of attracting and qualified CDL operators, I think Member Bronga mentioned it, or somebody did, the idea of reaching out to the school district and others. Matter of fact, there was a meeting this morning that Lance Wilbur and others were at with HR, with the school district on their academy concept, which I think helps students pick what career path they want to go on. And so we have a presence there. And if we can attract people before DOT signs them on, we're all in favor of that. So, with regard to adding staff and adding equipment, I mean, I think it's as I said before, I think everybody wishes that we could have plowed the snow out faster, but I'm not prepared to commit right now that we're certainly looking at all options for improving service, but I'm not prepared to commit that we're going to hire more people right now. We're still discussing that.
Okay, thank you for those answers, and thank you for your candor. Mr. Colhase, you provided some estimates here: $9 million in capital costs, $9 million additional per year in salaries, and so that would be, I think, if we were to plan for like the peak, right?
Yes.
Or for, I would be interested, depending on where we are at 1Q in the administration, bringing back something that you thought was more reasonable. I wonder along the same lines, do we have any vacancies in operators in street maintenance?
I can have Mr. Van Lanningham come up if he gives me the nod that I've got it wrong. I think we have 7 or 8 vacancies. We have 6 vacancies.
6, okay.
5 vacancies in
5?
in street. Oh, 14, 1-4.
Okay, so
I can't read sign language.
just because, 14 vacancies. So I think that's notable. And again, I think that probably gets to, we need to be competitive when it comes to our pay and benefits. I want to move on. I want to ask about, so this sort of informal collaboration partnership between DOT and the MOA. Is the municipality going to be reimbursed for the work that was done on DOT-owned facilities?
Through the chair, I'll start and then DOT can weigh in. We have a signed MOU or MOA with DOT that provides for reimbursement of the costs we've incurred on plowing the state roads on the November 11th, 12th timeframe. And then DOT and street maintenance are also coordinating right now on clearing some of the transit stops on state roads that are as yet uncleared, and we would be reimbursed for those. That's envisioned in the agreement as well. Did I have that correctly, gentlemen?
You did the checks in the mail, Kent. So no, it's a going from memory in ballpark numbers. I think we're about 138 hours for greater time, ballpark $35,000. So not significant in the total expense of our snow removal effort, but again, appreciate the help. So.
Okay, great. I think I just have two more questions, if it's okay, Mr. Chair. Actually, three more, sorry. What percent of resources in terms of equipment and people in the central region is split between Anchorage, the Mat-Su, and the Kenai, and has that balance shifted over the past 5 years?
Through the chair, Kirk Warren, Chief Maintenance and Operations for DOT. Our budget for Central Region is approximately $40 million, $43 million in operating expenses. I think that Anchorage and the Mat-Su are fairly equivalent, and Kenai Peninsula is a little bit less than that. So it's not a third exactly, but you might as well call it a third for these purposes.
And then did you want to address the second part of that question?
I'm sorry, could you restate?
Yeah,
it,
has that
please?
balance shifted over the past 5 years?
Not significantly. There was a time where we had Kenai Peninsula, or I'm sorry, the Anchorage district had the Silvertip station, which is at the beginning of the Turning and Pass. So that was part of the Anchorage facilities. It's now in Kenai Peninsula. So there was a shift at that time, but that's the only shift of any significance.
Okay, thank you. Member Raleigh also, I think, briefly touched on this. Capital projects for your DOT. I'm very concerned, and I think I've sort of highlighted this issue in our transportation committee and our AMATS policy committee on some of these expensive highway expansion projects, both in the AMATS boundary, but even things like the Safer Seward Highway, which I know you guys just had kind of during the same time we were having our regular meeting at the library. There's a public workshop about that. So some of these projects are, millions and millions of dollars to expand the highway and create extra lanes. And so I keep trying to drive home that every extra lane is a lane that must be maintained. And if we're in the position where the municipality is having to step up and help DOT maintain its current facilities, how is DOT, when it comes to approaching the long-range transportation plans, whether that's the STIP or the MTP, how are you factoring in those maintenance costs and obligations when it comes to building these new facilities when you're having difficulty maintaining your current ones?
Yeah, again, I mean, we can serve the city of Anchorage better if we operate as a team, for sure. And we're going to balance those things because we have needs. Whether it's adding additional lanes or straightening out curves on the Seward Highway, or constructing things like a pork chop island for a pedestrian refuge that's needed for pedestrian safety. That greatly decreases the efficiency of plowing. So we have to balance those needs between how do we make our roads safer and how do we make them more maintainable. And example, maybe Fireweed Lane, hasn't been reconstructed in a long time. It's not a modern road. So the design, the old design makes it very difficult for us to plow that street and then also to plow the sidewalks because everything is just too narrow there. There's no room to store any snow or even get in there and really effectively remove snow from those sidewalks. I probably didn't answer your question at all, but I think we have a per lane mile cost that it generally costs us to maintain roads, and it's considered when we put together a budget. So.
I appreciate that answer. I guess the point that I would drive at is if DOT is going to want to do new large capital projects, when we work collaboratively on the AMAPS policy committee or in other group settings, I think part of that answer, we do best when we work on a team. It just has to be acknowledged that if we're creating these new facilities, then you potentially are increasing the burden on municipal resources, not just DOT resources. So just want to I'll put a pin in that. And then actually my last question, and then I'll be done. Mr. Bird had a slide about the downtown business district, coordination between the downtown partnership and ACDA. I thought I saw Miss Krishna here. I don't know. Yes. Can I have her come up? Is that okay, Mr. Chair? Executive Director of the Downtown Partnership, and maybe just talk about some of the challenges that you had, because in my perspective is, and I think maybe Matthew, can you, or just make sure she has a microphone. Yep. Thank you. So I know there was some stuff on social media about the sidewalks versus the parking spaces versus the streets. And so one question that I would have maybe for Mr. Bird too is, what is ACDA's role in that coordination supposed to look like? What are their obligations to snow removal? And then I would like Ms. Krishna maybe to talk about some of the successes and challenges, because my personal perspective is that ADP provided a very high level of service when it came to removing snow from the sidewalks. So anyway, maybe to Mr. Bird first, if you want to answer, and then to Ms. Krishna. Sure.
I'll go ahead and kick things off. I do want to say that Kent and I were on the phone, Paul and I were on the phone, and of course, Jeffrey, the Easy Park director as well. So from my perspective, we were all in really close communication. Of course, as we heard, the municipality has their own timelines. I also want to make sure everyone knows that per code, if you look at the title related to special assessment districts, what ADP is charged with the Downtown Improvement District is providing supplemental services. So I just want to make sure that we keep that line as we're talking about services, which is to know that we are delegated some amount of services, but we're not responsible, of course, for all of the snow removal services in downtown. That's frankly not a task that a nonprofit can or should take on. So we do the best that we can to provide supplemental services for cleaning of the snow from downtown sidewalks. We coordinate with Easy Park. They don't have, my understanding is they don't provide any snow removal services themselves, but because they manage so many of those facilities, we include them in every single conversation so that they're aware of what's going on. And we didn't hear any concerns from them. But of course, between sidewalks, parking spaces, garages, streets, and alleys, there's a lot of roadway in downtown. So I think that we are actually all meeting on Monday to see how we can continue making sure that our timelines are lined up and we're continuing to provide all of the services that we're responsible for jointly.
If I could, Mr. Chair and Mr. Rowland, I'd like to have Paul Van Landingham come up and just talk briefly about how his knowledge of the coordination between Easy Park, the downtown partnership, and ACDA. He's probably the best position to speak to that. Thank you.
And potentially one question refinement. Whose job is it to clear snow from the street parking spaces?
Through the chair, could you repeat that, please, Mr. Ball?
Yeah, so I think the question is, what is ACDA's role in snow removal, if any? Because there was a slide about better coordination between ADP and ACDA. And I think really what that gets at is whose job is to clear the snow from the Easy Park parking spaces?
So it is street maintenance's responsibility to remove the snow once it has been deposited into the roadway, either in the traveled roadway or in the parking spaces. We have been working over the last couple of seasons here to coordinate with ADP. Some new leadership there, some rollover from some things that have happened in the past, and it's a work in progress. I have confidence after this week's meeting that we'll come even closer to hitting our marks on that coordination. There just needs to be some realization that the price of doing business when street maintenance rolls into downtown is about a $30,000 bill every time we roll into downtown. So the coordination needs to be better, will be better. And I think it'll start this next week when all of us get together and truly understand what everybody's role is down there.
Great. Thank you. I'm all done, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I have myself next in the queue. And first off, I feel like I'd be remiss if I just didn't take a second to say thank you to the operators, the mechanics, and the dispatchers during that event. I mean, that was a pretty heroic effort, and that's a tough job, and they're working morning, noon, and night. And I know that they often don't get the gratitude they deserve for that hard work. And if the job's not being done according to the public's expectations, that's not on them. That's on us. So a big thank you for those guys. And I would just encourage people in the public, when you see them out there, if you have a chance, give them a wave, shake their hand, because it's a tough job. I want to touch briefly on, we were talking about managing expectations, right? And to say, well, to say that in the event of a 16-inch snow event, we're going to clear it out in 84 hours, it's unrealistic, or it'd be extraordinarily expensive. And we talked about, managing that. And so maybe it makes more sense to say, well, if it's 16 inches, it'll be 120 hours. I'm not sure we met that target even. If that was the standard that we had communicated going into this event, I think we'd have to get pretty creative to say that we're actually able to achieve the plow within 120 hours. I've heard from quite a few sources, enough that I think this is reliable information, even if it's anecdotal, that a lot of people didn't see a plow truck for a week. Some people were essentially snowed in for 10 days in their neighborhood. So yeah, maybe 84 hours is an unrealistic goal, but if it's 120 hours, what is it actually going to take to achieve that? And I don't think we're going to say like, well, it's by another 30 graders and hire another 60 operators, but I think it's safe to say that probably there is, I think as Member Volin pointed out, some room between where we're at today and what it would take to meet a reasonable goal. And I think if we can explain those expectations, then that sets the bar for the community, right? And for us. And if we're not able to meet that threshold, then we need to figure out what resources we need to bring to bear. And also it lets people decide for themselves what's reasonable, right? Like, how much am I willing to be taxed in order to get the level of service I expect? So I think that should be part of the conversation. On point two, we are increasingly relying on contract services. And I understand that, yes, buying equipment and hiring people costs money. But, I was just looking, I think in 2023, prior to winter coming in, the muni just is rough math, so feel free to check it if you want. We spent over $3.5 million in contracting dump trucks and graders to help with snow removal. That's a lot of money. And then we came into this season and we had Mayor talked about, we're increasing the budget of $1.5 million for snow clearing. And then just last night we hear, we think we need another $2.5 million on top of that to get us through 2024. It's still pretty early in the season, right? This was a big snow, but it's not even December, or not even the end of December. And again, we keep adding money that we think we need to allocate towards contractors to do this work. And I don't know exactly where the delta is, but there is some point, right, where it becomes more efficient and more cost effective to move at least some of those services in-house, I think, especially when we see the competition for contractors out there. We talk about the fact that the military bases are using these contractors. We have the limited road service areas that are relying on private contractors. Apparently the state is relying on private contractors. We're asking more from private contractors. I also hear that there are fewer contractors out there doing the work. Like, there are only so many times we can kind of dip into that sort of contractor pot before, those resources are expended, and there's just simply no capacity, or it becomes cost prohibitive for us to utilize that. So I don't have an answer today, but I think we do need to talk about what is the reasonable balance between the resources we maintain as a city for addressing this, and then what are we going to contract out? Because it seems like the answer for the last couple of years is just more contractors, more contractors, more contractors. And I'm not sure that that's cost efficient anymore. And I just want to, I guess I have sort of two questions in here before I move back to the queue for DOT. Did I understand that the bill, essentially what we can expect to be reimbursed at the municipality for clearing the state roads, was it $35,000?
In that ballpark, yeah.
I get that there's a basis for that number, but boy, that sure sounds awfully low to me. I get that we probably have a formula where we look at the labor costs and mileage on our equipment and things of that nature. But 35,000, in terms of the lost opportunity, right? As you guys explained in the briefing, the fact that, and correct me again if I get this wrong, but the fact that we pulled our equipment out of the neighborhoods to take care of the state roads because we thought that was an emergency, allowed that snow to set up in the neighborhoods, to where it became so much less efficient and more difficult to remove it from those neighborhoods. I mean, that delay of a day or 2 days that we spent on the state streets really, I think, cost us a lot of time and resources to clear out the neighborhoods, right? I mean, I think that's problematic if we're talking about, going forward. And then $35,000, I would guess just the damage to people's private vehicles from having to drive on these really extraordinarily poor streets is going to be well beyond $35,000. I mean, I don't know if Mr. Hughes or somebody wants to go out and try and do a poll of the community on how much damage their vehicles sustain trying to get around the city, but I'm sure it is going to far exceed what we got back from the state from that. So I think that does not feel like a sustainable model. And I mentioned it to Mr. Byrd, and I will just put it forward as a rhetorical question today. If this happened again tomorrow, what would be different? Or is it going to be more of the same? And I think if the answer is this is just all we have because this is all the capacity that exists in the system, I think that's problematic. So I'll get to my actual real question here. So State DOT, you said, I think you guys maintain 11 plow trucks, 4 graders, something like that. Were they all operational at the start of the event?
Yeah, to the chair, yes, Chair Johnson.
And they remained operational? You were able to keep them up and running throughout?
I would have to defer to Casey Eliason, who is in the audience, but we had some that were being repaired, but with the people that we could sit in the seats during those shifts, I believe that they were operational, yes.
And the 11 plow trucks and 4 graders, how does that compare to what the fleet size was in years past? We look back a year, 5, 10.
I'd have to look and do the research for you and get back to you on that.
Yeah,
But I can say anecdotally, there's not been significant changes. For the most part, the dollar value per lane mile for maintenance responsibilities has not changed other than with inflation and wages and things of that sort. So.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I think, Sean, you sort of previewed you may ramp up your equipment. Is there plans or discussions at DOT to acquire more an additional capacity?
I may have spoken out of turn there. I think we need to evaluate with our operational people, evaluate the resources, set a standard, and see if we have adequate resources or not.
Okay.
And, so that decision has not been made. So
that's fair. I hope the conversation happens, right? Because I think again, we need to set realistic expectations, but I'm not sure that even what happened in November really meets reasonable expectations. So yeah, I think I will just leave it at that for now and then give another member a chance to ask a question. So Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, I just want to echo a lot of the other comments of thanks that we've been hearing today for management and the operators and everyone in between for all of the great work that you all have done. Just a couple comments and then a question. And I think you've been hearing a lot of folks bring this up, the term of manage expectations. For me, from a policy perspective, and from what I clearly heard from my constituents in the hundreds, was that the expectation is set really, they're looking at us to set the expectation at the policymakers and at the mayors as the chief executive to set the expectation of this is what we expect to happen in any of these instances of a snow emergency, ice emergency, whatever it is. So, and frankly, for me, those expectations should be guided by the people that we represent. The people are overwhelmingly telling us, you need to do better, then we should be looking at that realistically to say we can do better, rather than from the framework of, well, this is what we can do, right? There has to be something, as I think others have said, in between, this is what we can do and we can do better. And from my perspective, I think that's really comes in 2 forms, looking at personnel. And I think a couple of folks have asked about this. And if you look back roughly about 25 years ago, there were 94 budgeted positions that were operators. And all of them were full. If you look now, we have 84 budgeted positions that are operators with, now we learned 14 vacancies. So the real number there is 70 versus 94. There's no parity there, right? There's no way that you can do the same amount of work with that many vacancies, with that many fewer operators. And then I also think we need to, look at this from a equipment perspective, and really understanding that this is a multi-year lead time if we want to get new equipment. I would suspect if we even pulled the trigger now, that we wouldn't get this equipment until 2025, winter 2025, right? And so, I would urge the administration that these kinds of analysis and thinking needs to happen sooner rather than later. And I guess I'll just go to my question. So on yesterday's assembly meeting, there were some questions raised on spreadsheets, and specifically sort of echoing Member Zolotel, since she isn't here. I think it would be great to look at a spreadsheet of the contracts that we have, of the burn rate of those contracts, the total dollars appropriated, just to sort of help the assembly get a fiscal sense of where we are right now. And then that way, if any future contracts come to us, which, let's hope we don't have to deal with any future contracts, but just in case, we can get that full picture. Is that something that the administration is preparing?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to getting that. And then I guess the last thing I will say, and I will leave it up to the experts to really think about this, but this is something that some of my constituents really hammered on me about, which is that the snow plowing, I don't know how it can do this, but there should be some consideration in terms of workforce needs. Not all neighborhoods are created equal, in that some neighborhoods, there's probably a higher propensity of folks in a neighborhood that they can telework. And there are other neighborhoods where there's probably a higher propensity of folks in that neighborhood where they do not have that option. And so I don't know how you could consider or gauge those factors, but I know that it is something that several of my constituents in Midtown were really concerned about.
All right, thank you. And I'll note we have about 11 minutes left, and next in the queue, Member Cross.
Oh, sweet. I get to close it out. First off, tremendous thank you, both to the Department of Transportation and to our plow truck drivers and you, Paul. I've only spent 52 winters up here. I remember my dad said, you're either good with a shovel or you're good at math, but either way, you'll have a job in Anchorage. Okay. So I got good at both. I started driving a plow truck when I was 16, and actually for 4 years had a cross-country snow removal in the late 90s where I had a couple plow trucks, and I would subcontract out. Back then they only paid $50 an hour, and you supplied all the equipment, and we would do Alaska Regional and Diamond Parking, and I spent years plowing snow. So when I hear comments like, oh, this is just another snow, this is regular, no, I don't think you guys realize that the last couple years that we've had were kind of like this wet layer. When you get that wet layer, like there's a snow science. And I think a lot of people forget there's a science to snow. When it starts and your ground isn't frozen or it's warm and it snows and that wet layer gets heavy and then it insulates, because snow is God's natural best form of insulation, and it does that. And then you get ambient cold air on top. It is like the worst combination. That's why you don't go snowmobiling. That is going to create avalanche danger. You're going to die. It may look soft but it's a trash can full of feathers versus a trash can full of Quikrete. And when you brush that top layer, that under layer then hits ambient cold air and it freezes, it turns to concrete. And so there's a struggle with the equipment. There's a struggle. And so when we see these anomalies, I think one thing that we got to recommend is that we can't just say do better, which we look for when we're stressed in this manner. We look for the imperfections in our system, and we try to make incremental improvements, right? maybe climate change and maybe we're under a new reality and we'll just have to see how that is. And we have to decide as voters and we have to decide as assembly how much money we want to invest in not knowing the future of weather. But I will tell you that there is a science of snow. I remember in 2012, we had like 135 inches of snow. We were riding, that was Dan Sullivan, we were riding our snowmobiles from Huffman all the way up into Flat Top Chugiak and riding back into our garages. Things were shut down for days. I don't remember Dan Sullivan being drug out into the street and yelled at, "Where's your snow response?" We just said it's 134 inches of snow. 2 years later, 24 inches of snow. We were mountain biking in Kincaid Park in January. Mountain biking, no studs, on dirt. 2 years later. So we see these anomalies, and any people don't think that snow changes. How many houses in the last 2 years? We saw 19 roof collapses last year. Well, I mean, that's obviously a sign that things are changing, and now we're seeing it. So I don't blame you entirely. I just say, what are the incremental things that we can control, that we realize that, hey, listen, there might be a new reality, that's not your fault, but how do we respond to these things in a practical manner? And I see these opportunities, right? One is maybe more transfer of responsibilities, okay? And what I mean by that is out in Eagle River, we have like the Eagle River Road that goes back to the Nature Center that serves thousands of homes. Okay. Subursa, because they're locally controlled, right? It's quicker and it's local. Subursa under the McKenna plows all the neighborhoods from Mount Majestic Circle and Prudhoe Bay Drive and all those back in there in Eckland days before the state finally gets around to plowing the more, usually 5 to 6 days before. And the question is, okay, is there a transfer responsibility where we can't enter into where we can allow some of those Subursa contracts to drop that blade? They're driving over 11 miles, 12 miles of state road to go plow neighborhoods that get done days before the state. Now, I understand there's a difference between low speed equipment that does neighborhoods and high speed equipment that does highways, but can't they just get Eagle River Road beyond one lane? Even if they just drop the blade, maybe they don't do the sides, but try to clear it up. There's huge opportunities in these areas where we have single source of entry, single source out, where those roads don't get hit for 5 or 6 days. They don't get sanded. They get rutted. And meanwhile, all the neighborhoods are clear. That's not to say that our Department of Transportation isn't doing a good job, but when we have these unique snow conditions, if we're going to start seeing these anomalies, I think we look for opportunities to share responsibilities and not just say, draw a line in the snow and say, that's you and this is me. And we pee on our side and that's our territory. No, I think there needs to be a shared responsibility to say, what is in the best interest of the neighbors who hold there? I'd like to see King Career Center start a heavy equipment operator. If I knew that heavy equipment operating, and there was a class when I was in high school, I would have signed up first thing. Like, and maybe we can start training those future individuals. And the last thing I want to clear up some stuff. Mr. Johnson said that last night there was an ad to add 2.8. There wasn't. The money was in the budget. This was to extend our contract. We were contracted out for a specific mark. This wasn't a more money ask. This was a larger contract that allowed us under that contract to spend money. So I also think that there is a misperception that, hey, listen, you're just asking for more money. No, there was money within the budget. They were asking for an ability within the contract to spend more so that we could get those haul trucks. And so it's also important for us. I'm going to close on this, and this is managing expectations. And I don't mean this, I want to try to be as respectful as I can, but it's important for us to manage expectations to our constituents when you have a historical perspective. And I know not everybody has lived in Anchorage for 52 years, but I'm here to tell you, whether or not you acknowledge it, these last couple winters have not been like I recall. The snow is larger, is heavier, it comes in larger dumps. It's got these wet levels. It's interesting because, I mean, I just don't remember it being so brutal, like coming in those waves. But how do you prepare for it? And I think the last thing, if I could just speak to, the transfer responsibilities, is maybe that also looks like creating like an emergency snow response. But that's what our contractors are, aren't they? I mean, until we know what the new norm is, the only way you can respond without just paying for people to sit in chairs until it snows or whatever is to have contracts. That's the most fiscally responsible way to do it until you can figure out that, gosh, it's been 3 or 4 winters in a row and we've seen these extreme levels. Perhaps we need to start considering. But if we're going to enter into employment agreements where we're going to hire you for 7 to 10 years or 20 years and pay your pension, but I don't know if this is the new weather normal. I don't know if that's fiscally responsible. So I think these contracts play a place in the budget. Kent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Cross and to the body, I kind of wrapping up. I know there's 4 minutes and I don't have prepared closing remarks, but I do think that Mr. Cross brings up a couple things that I wanted to touch on. I have talked with Mr. Van Landingham about this idea of the double staffing to address the 184-hour snowstorm cut in half. That in Paul's mind, and I would agree, that means that in the summertime, there's 60 people sitting around with really nothing to do because there's just not work year-round to keep people busy. There's maybe a model to address that, but that's the current fact. I wanted to touch on a couple things. When I worked for street maintenance in 1984, the plow-out standard was 72 hours. So hasn't changed significantly since then. I also, and this is just, I'm not debating, I'm not arguing, I'm just providing some facts that I'm aware of. I'm aware from talking with Paul and his staff that in 27 years, the best plow out they ever had was 56 hours with a fully declared plow out. Mr. Rivera, you're correct. The staffing 20 or so years ago was 94. I think when Paul started, there were 94 people on the seniority list. Now there's 84 spots. So in the 80s, I know that ice was an issue then. I remember stopping at a stop sign in a dump truck and sliding off the road because the roads were glare ice. So some things have changed, some haven't. And I think one other comment from talking with Paul, Eric Hodgson, and Jim Bells, his superintendents, they all concur. This last event was the worst series of storms they've seen in 27 years by far. So, and the last thing I would say is that managing expectations, maybe that's not the right terminology, because that sounds like we're minimizing, we're explaining to the public why we're not going to do what they want us to do. I think there's some room for us to better explain what we're doing. I think that Ms. Bronga mentioned that the plow plans on the website were a bit confusing. Maybe somebody else mentioned it, that the data wasn't updated currently, or as currently as it could have been. That update is done by street maintenance superintendents. It's not done by a webmaster. We're hoping to address that. We're working with some folks now to update that webpage and provide better information. So I said earlier, I think that this forum and others are good. I think we all recognize the need to do better, and we may not agree on every aspect of making that happen, but I think there's a lot of alignment on what we do agree on, and we're committed to improving. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Collis. And we are pretty much out of time. I would consider possibly adding 10 minutes if there would be a motion to that effect.
So moved.
And I'm not sure what exactly the procedure in this committee is. Is there any opposition? All right, let's go ahead and add 10 minutes. And we have a couple people in the queue. I really do want to make sure we don't go past that 10-minute mark. Is there anyone here for public comment? I see one. We'll make sure we set aside a few minutes for you. Real quickly with quick questions. I believe, remember Raleigh had one.
Yeah, thank you. And this is one I'll follow up in writing for DOT folks. So thanks for sharing a little bit more about your budget. I'm surprised to hear that the split is essentially equal between Anchorage and Matsu. So I was just doing the math. We have over 2.5 times the population, not to mention major facilities, and pretty much everybody needs to drive through Anchorage at some point if they're on the road system. So I don't know if the metric is by land area. I understand we are smaller. There's also number of road miles, those kinds of things. But I just want to flag that is something I do want to understand better. And I think in terms of shared responsibility, I think that's an interesting question to have with other local governments as well. So I appreciate the discussion about whose responsibility for whose roads. And then also, again, I'll follow up, but I'm interested in roughly maybe the cost per foot or the cost per road mile of plowing from both the city and the state in terms of major roads, neighborhood streets, and sidewalks, knowing that DOT doesn't do those kind of more localized ones. But I think just going forward, if we're going to talk about shifting responsibilities, we also need to understand the cost. And so I just wanted to put those on the record now, but I will follow up in writing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then if it's a quick question, next thing you have Member Braga.
It's very quick. So I've heard a lot about managing expectations, but what's coming in my head is that Alaskans are really good at rallying for emergencies. You declared an emergency. If we'd had some public service announcements that said, we are under a snow emergency, please shovel your fire hydrants, check on your elderly neighbor. People love to help if they are reached out to in an approachable way. We were in an emergency. If we were asked to stay home unless it was an absolute emergency, I think things would have been much better on Tuesday. My neighbors wouldn't have been sleeping in the church parking lot instead of getting home.
Thank you. And then Member Rivera, you had a quick question?
No, not a quick question. Just a quick comment. And that's something that Mr. Cross said reminded me that I forgot to mention one thing that I think is really critical. And it's not something that most members really talk about, but that's climate change and how climate change is really impacting a lot of this work. And so I don't think we need to wait 2-3 more years to figure out what things are going to be is going to be happening in the future. I think we need to be talking with meteorologists right now and start planning for the next several years. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I believe we have one person here for audience participation. If you come up. I think this is the bad microphone. I got one.
My name is Renee Kennicott.
Yeah, just if you would,
Oh.
just introduce yourself, what part of town you're from, and then you have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm Renee Kennicott. I'm from downtown Anchorage. I'm here on behalf of Originality and a handful of other downtown businesses and myself personally because I live downtown. I first want to say thank you so much to all of the street maintenance crews, both muni and state. I haven't had an issue on my street. I understand it takes a little while to get things done. The graders on my street are awesome and totally happy. The other thing that I want to say is we had a concern, and I know we did a TV interview and there's a news interview, blah, 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 social media petition. We first and foremost said thank you very much to the street maintenance. That did not get written down anywhere, but we made that a point. Second is our issue is with ADP. And yes, you do an awesome job clearing those sidewalks. Unfortunately, what you do is you put all of that snow into the parking. We have had, for several years, we have tried to work this out through ADP. We had a specific meeting with Radhika when she first came on board. We had another meeting after this snow event, which really didn't go anywhere. That's why we started the petition, and we were advised to do that on behalf of or by the city ombudsman. I know last year through the shoveling of the sidewalks, my vehicle was snowed in. It was literally snowed in because of all of the snow that was shoveled from the sidewalk into the street. And I was stuck. So I had to call because I didn't have a shovel and say, you're going to have to come and shovel me out now because you shoveled me in. So that is our issue, is that there just needs to be some better way. And in the last couple of weeks, we have seen a difference that they have been shoveling piles instead of just shoveling it all into the street to cover the parking spots. And then the only inefficiency really that we saw is the four-wheeler with the plow on it came down the street. Literally maybe 15, 20 or so minutes later, the shovel guy came along and shoveled more snow where the little four-wheeler grader had just gone. So that's inefficiency. But we feel bad that we had to go to this length to just be heard. And it shouldn't have had to get to that point where we've tried and tried and tried. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Was there anyone else here with a public comment? No, all right. Well, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's here from from the Muni, from State DOT, from the Downtown Partnership. I think it was a good conversation. Obviously, I think we're all have some takeaways from this. For me, I think we need to figure out what are realistic expectations and then figure out what resources do we need to actually meet those expectations. And then coordination with our partners at the state, right? I mean, we in the assembly, we can talk about what steps we need to take in terms of, budget and things of that nature. But I think we also need to talk to our state partners about what you guys need to do the job. I don't feel like giving up 2 days of plowing and what happened to our neighborhoods for $35,000 really makes sense. God forbid if this happens again, when it happens again, you do it once, you're a nice guy. You do it twice, it's your job. And I'm not sure if we have the capacity to make that our job right now. So I'll leave it at that. But again, thank you everyone for being here today. Thanks for answering the questions. And with that, we'll adjourn.